You're listening to Remotely One, a podcast that educates, entertains, and inspires you to take your life back from the office commute. I'm Rick, a former beer rep who left the warehouse to become a voice actor and digital creator.
And I'm Kaleem, a remote work advocate and consultant. We're going to speak with some of the top professionals who have managed to avoid the commute as they share stories from the most inspiring to the most comical, all while working remotely.
Man, this sounds awesome. Let's clock in.
A big Billy Joel fan, and I've seen a Billy Joel concert in every city that I've lived in.
Wait a second. We got to lay some groundwork here, okay? Are we talking like 70s dope-smoking Billy Joel, like Piano Man, or like Uptown Girl, like cheesy 80s Billy Joel?
Whole thing, cheese from the whole spectrum. Yeah.
All right, no, I can live with that.
Billy Joel in the early 70s. That is great.
It's like one of those things that like in middle school, like stumbled into my dad's like CD collection, and that was like some of my early exposure to music, and it's just like lived with me my whole life since then.
Oh, dude, I love it. Welcome back, everybody, to Remotely One. I am one of your two amazing co-hosts. I don't take that term lightly. My name's Rick Haney, and I'm flanked by my ever-impressive and whimsical co-host, Kaleem Clarkson. Hey, buddy.
Hey, sir. I haven't seen you in a while, man. You look great again.
Oh, man, I feel like I'm back to life, you know? I went through COVID. I went through this dynamic kind of pseudo-career change. I am, like, back on the mountain, brother.
Yeah, that blue shirt, it just really brings out those baby blue eyes, bro. It just really does. I mean,
well, thank
it does,
you.
Man.
Yes, sir. That's what I'm all about, right? You gotta flash those baby blues.
Hey, shake what your mama gave you is what I've been told. You know what I mean?
Shake your money maker, baby. I don't know why I said that. Hey,
it's okay.
Everybody, since we're all here, now you know where to find us, right? So do us a huge favor. Go to ratethispodcast.com/remotely one and just leave us a review, please. Again, ratethispodcast.com/remotely one. If you could do that for us, we would love it ever so much. We'd really appreciate it. Since 2015, Remotely One is one of the largest remote communities of remote work professionals with over 3,000 Slack members and 5,000 email subscribers. And that number is growing up by the day, if I'm not mistaken.
Yes, sir. Power Man 5000, son. Remember them? Power Man 5000?
It's free to join, so go check it out at remotely1.com. And with that out of the way, Kaleem, let's have a tease or two about today's amazing guest.
You know, Rick, one thing that I just love about this podcast is that all the guests just make us feel bad about ourselves. You know what I mean?
Not intentionally, I might add. It's nothing they do in particular. They're just so much smarter than we are.
Yes, they just make it happen. You ready for this? Our guest, originally from North Carolina, Winston-Salem, but this is the one. He's a Georgetown Hoya. Went to Georgetown, what? Sir. Yep.
Huh?
Mm-hmm.
Wow.
So okay. He knows a few things.
About a thing or two.
He can educate people.
Mm-hmm.
Guess, what was your major?
Economics and government.
Oh, snap.
Everybody at Georgetown is a government double major. Like people like, I had friends that were like music in government, like art in government. Everybody's like, you're like in DC, you might as well get a government major.
Wow.
Did you ever get a chance to meet Allen Iverson?
No, can't say I did. It's a bummer. Like, Bill Clinton came to campus all the time, but no.
Yeah.
Bill? Okay, Bill. He did not inhale, everybody. He did not inhale.
We are asking the important questions on this podcast.
Rick, it doesn't stop there at Georgetown either, right?
No, I don't
Listen
think so.
to this. He was a 2020 Y Combinator participant. Y freaking Combinator, bro.
Let's talk about that for a second. What does that entail exactly?
It entails getting picked by a whole bunch of mama jamas and then getting trained by a whole bunch of other mama jamas and then like doing awesome with your company with a whole bunch of other mama jamas. Unbelievable.
You can't say that about a lot of people from Winston-Salem, I'll be honest. I mean, a lot of mama jamas kicking around, but they don't come from Winston-Salem.
Our guest is now a resident of Cleveland, Ohio. Just picked Ohio. Guess, how did you pick Ohio? Was it the LeBron effect? I mean, like, what's the story?
It was, well, I actually did move to Ohio the week of the 2016 NBA Finals, where Cleveland won, which was a fantastic time to move to Cleveland, I'll say.
I would say so.
I moved here as part of a fellowship program I did called Venture for America for college, and ended up never leaving. So here I am 7 years later.
There he goes. He just threw out another accomplishment. Venture, what was it? Venture for America?
Venture for America, yeah.
Just venturing out. Our guest today, Rick,
Yeah.
he is a huge, and when I say huge, I mean huge, Billy Joel fan.
What?
Yeah, when you look at him, you're like, you sure you like Billy Joel, bro? Like, I mean, that's
Sing us the song, you're the piano man. Sing us a song tonight. Like that, Billy Joel?
that Billy Joel. We actually have Billy Joel live in studio today, listeners and viewers. And not only that, he's seen Billy Joel in every city that he's lived in. So He's seen him in Cleveland, he's seen him in DC, he's seen him in Winston-Salem. Anywhere else you've lived there, guest?
That's it.
Okay. So our guest, he is the co-founder of a company called Gather, which has been acquired by ChartHop. Listeners and viewers, I want you to give a warm welcome to Alex Hilleary! Alex Hilleary! Woo! Settle down, audience. Settle your ass down.
Sit down, people.
Oh, I just got worked up, bro. Thanks for being here, man. Appreciate you.
Yeah, well, thanks for having me on.
Anytime, man. Anytime.
Yeah, man. It's really great to have you. Thank you for tolerating us this far. If you made it this far, it means we'll probably get to the end of the show without too many hiccups. So thank you. You've got an impressive list of accomplishments here, but how did it all happen? Like, was there ever like an aha moment where you were, I don't know if it maybe when you were in school or maybe earlier in your professional career when you were like, man, this remote life, this is something that I really can dig my teeth into. This is like my aha moment where I know this is it for me. Did you ever have that?
Yeah, I think so. And I'll kind of connect a few of the dots here. So my kind of transplant to Cleveland story is, so as a part of this program called Venture for America, that's the concept is that you take people out of college or early in their careers who kind of want to work in startups. And instead of them just like going to the Bay Area or New York, they go work in cities that are trying to build startup communities. So cities like Cleveland, a lot of like mid-sized cities in the South and Midwest. And so that's how I ended up in Cleveland. And the problem that a lot of cities like Cleveland are facing is they lose a lot of their talent to other places, right? And so like this is kind of one of those things of like, can we have people build companies here? Actually, even earlier this afternoon, I was just talking to a founder at another tech company who's from Cleveland and is in New York. And that's like one of the things that's always the problem is like Cleveland loses this talent. And being here for even in my first few years, it was really interesting to see that dynamic play out. And I think early on, like what I bought into with the Venture for America mission is I think that you're getting a lot of, especially like looking at tech, for example, like you see that a lot on the coasts. And you see the opportunity of like, if we could make this more evenly distributed around the US, like that would be something that's really, really cool. And then you start to talk to some of these people who grew up in Cleveland and maybe are in New York and California, and they actually would love to be able to come back to Cleveland. Like a lot of them want to start families here. A lot of them want to be around like aging parents and stuff. But it was this trade-off of like career versus like what I actually want in my personal life. And so I think during that process, I just got a lot of exposure to that. And like the reason we started Gather, and this was going back to like 2018, so this is like pre-pandemic, is one of my co-founders who also did this program with me and I, we wanted to build something around remote work. We're like, we see more companies who are like starting to let a few employees go remote. And it's like, what about a future state of the world where like more employees could be remote and you could actually have like these tech workers like living in Cleveland, contributing to the economy here, like being back with like their family and raising a family where they want to. And I'm like, this is like a really cool world. So we actually got into this whole Like we started Gather, which became a software for people operations teams, but the whole concept from the very beginning was like, how do we help empower remote work? And the very, early version of that product was like helping with onboarding and offboarding processes and like helping build out those processes so that you could empower that remotely. But we kind of always had that remote thing in mind because we were driven by this like same mission, which is the same thing that brought us to Cleveland.
So, I was new to remote work when we started this podcast, and I have met so many intelligent individuals, so many brilliant people. There are so many ways to describe different roles. My question is in regard to people operations, right? There's so many different ways to refer to people ops, but how would you, in your own words, define what people operations really is?
Pressure, Alex.
Interesting. Well, I mean, I think and the terminology can go a lot of different ways. The way I see it used the most in this space is like when you're contrasting traditional HR to people operations. And I think the distinction a lot of people like to draw is that, a traditional HR function is more admin focused, benefits, it's kind of some compliance, those sorts of things. And then I think really in people operations grew out of this kind of like tech forward mindset, but like, I think that's Google coined the term back in like the mid 2000s, but just the concept of being a little bit more people first and really thinking about the employee experience deeper. I think now you get just like people operations departments. So like a lot of like HR has just generally been, and especially like tech oriented companies, has been rebranded as people operations. But I think the distinction really came out of like wanting to think about HR in a whole different way of like maybe the way that we thought of HR in the past.
Yeah, I agree with you, Alex. I also think it's also a little bit of a rebrand, right? Like I think HR, when you just say it to a lot of people, it's like that's where I go when I get in trouble, or that's where I go when I have a complaint to tattle on someone. It's not tattling, by the way, people. It's feedback. So feel free. You should feel comfortable to go to your people ops team, your HR team, and talk about the challenges. But I looked at it as kind of like a rebrand of, the seat at the table supported by data. So now you're seeing a lot of chief people officers who are reporting directly to the CEO or the COO and are really at that seat of the table when you're talking about operations. A lot of technology. I mean, obviously, HR tech. So a lot of how you interact with people, how you build a culture, it does have to do with policy and it does have to do with tools. People ops is kind of what HR should have been forever as a reputation versus like, oh, you're in trouble. So anyway, that's just kind of how I feel. So I got a question for you in regards to the people ops community. So you actually created a community called the people ops community. Two-part question, two parts. What does community mean to you, right? And then, like, why did you feel like you needed to create one specifically for people ops professionals?
Yeah, absolutely. So I'll kind of a little bit continue down the story here of like, so we founded this company Gather, and we're exploring a lot of different concepts because we wanted to empower remote work, like I was saying. And generally we gotten this advice that like, we would talk to some other people that had, founded tools aimed towards remote workers, and everybody was like, okay, so there's two different audiences here. One is people operations and one is digital nomads. And again, put yourself in like pre-pandemic mindset where like the remote work world was not like, this is like something on the periphery here. They're like digital nomads get all of the attention, but have like no budget. So like you don't try to build a software tool for digital nomads, because it's just like really buzzy. And so I think we kind of went down the path and kind of, so that's how we ended up with like ultimately what is like a people operations software company. In my job, so we had three of us founders. I was the growth founder, and I come from a background of like marketing and content and those sorts of things. Ultimately, like the community came out of like, it was a growth play for us with our company. And I think the opportunity we saw is like, we were going out there, we were talking to a lot of people. The company's growing. We hit COVID, right? Which is like a very interesting time where we were early in this company that was like a little bit, we weren't branded that much around remote work at that time, but we had this remote work concept that we were selling to people operations. We just focused on like, how do you build out like an onboarding workflow that works for remote teams. And so like immediately in the pandemic, we're talking to like, summer of 2020, this is when we're going through Y Combinator. We're talking to all these ops people who are like, the economy took a downturn, but then all of a sudden startups started getting hot. So like they're starting to hire a bunch of people remotely for the first time ever. We have some expertise there. That's kind of where we plug in. But I'm talking to all of these, like, especially I think the heads of people at like Series B startups, a lot of these like, they're a one-person people team, maybe a company that's like 80 people, and they're trying to navigate all of this like new stuff for the first time during this year. Like all of a sudden, like all of the playbooks they had in the past had blown up. And I was having dozens of conversations a week with these people. And I kept on referencing other people I'd talked to. So I'm like, oh, this person I talked to yesterday was just saying the same thing. You should really talk to them. And I was giving them like introductions there, because that's the way I can be helpful and kind of like build my relationships with everybody. And so very quickly from there, we realized there's an opportunity to actually connect people. So we started using, and it started with a newsletter and then a coffee chat matching program we were doing. And it was just basically like, how can we scale what we're already doing, which is being like, here, you should talk to this other relevant person that's like feeling a lot of the same things that you are. So in a lot of ways, like our community, and those were the foundations of the community that we run, 3.5, 4 years later, that started at Gather. And when ChartHop acquired us, they let me continue to build the community. And it's been really cool to see it grow, but it really happened organically. So everything that we've built out to date has come from like our community members like asking for something, right? It's not just like, hey, we want to create this space as like a full marketing play. It's had a lot of great like brand impact on us. And to this day, it's like the people operations community, like sponsored by ChartHop, and we're giving like ChartHop exposure. But at the end of the day, we're not talking about ChartHop in the space. We're talking about people operations. And it's just been awesome to be able to focus on that connection piece. You talk to people that there's all sorts of different communities out there. And I was talking to other community managers a few months back. I did talk to a dozen of them. I was just like, okay, I understand the value that certain community members get out of our space, which is a lot of the matching. They want to know, like, gut check the policies they're creating against peers. They want to benchmark what they're doing against peers. So like if something changes, they're like, hey, we're planning an offsite. Like, what's your COVID policy? And get what other peers are doing and get a pulse of that. And that's how they use our community. But I think other community spaces, and even other ones in the HR and people ops spaces, who get people who are just trying to be there to commiserate with each other or like motivate each other, right? Or you get spaces where you have new people to the space who are just trying to immerse themselves in the conversations going on. So it's been really interesting to just talk to other community managers, whether that's in our space or elsewhere. Like, people get different values out of different community spaces. And I think community is a word that lumps around like a whole lot of different actions, which is ultimately putting a lot of professional people in one space together and figuring out how to provide value for them.
Yeah, man. I mean, you just mentioned something that really kind of begs a question on my end. You said COVID policy. And I know that you remember what life was like before the pandemic. In your memory and in your experience, the pandemic arrives, it hits everybody all at once. All of a sudden, companies had to transition, and for many of them, the people ops were tasked with having to figure out how to navigate this remote operation thing. How hard has it been in your experience? Where was the difficulties for HR professionals then, and how have they moved past them since?
Yeah, that's a good call out. Obviously, it's been a little bit of a different experience for everyone, but I cite like that time period as the moment when a lot of these like people ops people had to start adapting quicker and reacting to things. Like a ton of stuff got thrown on their plate, whether it was like figuring out how to do internal operations remotely. I think quickly DEIB became something that went onto their plate back in 2020 as well. Internal communications, all of this stuff. So all of a sudden they had to do a whole lot of different things and a whole lot of stuff that they hadn't done before. And I think that's the thing where it was like relying on peers, because like, maybe they had that same role at another company in the past, but they basically had to throw out the script and, do things completely differently than they'd done before. And so that's why you had to kind of learn very quickly. I think there were a lot of people burnt out during that time period. We worked a lot with high growth tech companies. So like, you had this dual thing where it's like they went remote And then all of a sudden tech also blew up on this like crazy growth train for 2 years where a lot of these companies were tripling headcount year over year. And so like they were growing just like way ahead of what people operations was able to do. I think now we can look back at like the tech boom times as like, oh, that was nice. We're like, everybody was being hired and we didn't have, all these layoffs and that sort of thing. At the same time, some of these people operations people, even in the height of all that, were so ridiculously burned out because like they couldn't keep up. So I think one thing that's changed a little bit, at least in the past year and a half in the tech space, is like there's been constantly new challenges, right? With rifts and layoffs and those sorts of things going on, with I think a lot of new internal comms challenges, but at least things have like slowed down a bit in that like, I don't know, it was nuts talking to all these folks that are like, yeah, we're tripling headcount and we are so far behind at building the structures to actually scale this organization in the way we need to. And so I think that stands out to me. But I do think that people operations now, and something that's not going to change in the future, is like they bear more responsibilities. One of the things I was really interested in is like the internal communications thing. Basically, so many like internal comms became something like that's something that like bigger companies do. But like whether it was navigating DEIB challenges, pandemic related challenges, layoff challenges, like all of a sudden internal comms became a real function of a smaller and mid-sized org. And that function became the responsibility of people operations in a way it had not in the past. And like, I don't think that's going to change anymore. So there's definitely an added responsibility put on the department.
I 100% agree. And what's kind of interesting, it's almost like the pandemic was like, oh, now you all care about people ops. Like, it's almost as if it lifted it up. Like, holy smokes, we have to get these computers shipped to people. We need policies on this. Quick. We need this now because we're all at home. Like, for me, I kind of look at it as, okay, now everybody sees where and how important a really solidified people ops strategy and people are in those roles. So it was kind of a challenging time, and I'm sure people are still kind of feeling it. And you're right, they're going to have a lot more responsibilities. Your newsletter is fantastic. I'm not just saying that because you're on the show. I'll talk some ish about you when you get off the show. But right now, I'm going to like hype up your newsletter. What I like about it, and also kind of like a result of the pandemic, there were a lot of hires. A lot of people were hired into people ops because they needed them. Mm-hmm. Very similarly, we're kind of slowing down a little bit. A lot of people had to kind of, a lot of people ops people were let go. So can you tell me a little bit about what your newsletter does to help people find their next people operations gig?
Yeah, absolutely. I think the newsletter's gone through a few different iterations in its time. So we've been running this for 3.5 years now, People Ops Weekly. We have a blurb. I try to source that from conversations I'm having with people ops folks. We've always had a job board as part of the newsletter, and that was thanks to our early at Gather. We had a great community manager named Clara who came to us and she's like, we got to put a job board on this. Like, that's like, the newsletter needs a job board. People are always looking for, like people ops jobs. They're burnt out again back in like 2021. And we're like, okay, fine. Like, we'll put a job board on there. And I think in the past year and a half, though, that's become especially pressing. So we've been running this job board now as part of the newsletter, but we really started to ramp stuff up when layoffs started hitting. And so the job board is available on its own at like the peopleopsjobboard.com, but we also run new jobs in the bottom of each newsletter. And early on, we were doing like, every week, like 6 jobs, but now we've started to spend a lot more time because I think that's one of the ways that we see we can provide the most value to the folks in our community is like by sourcing jobs. And so we're adding about 30 to 50 jobs a week to the job board. And I don't know, it's been really cool. I've now heard a lot of stories of people who have gotten their jobs through the job board. I don't know. It just like happens so casually. Like I'll just be talking to somebody and they're like, also, I got this job from like your job board. And I'm like, that's so cool. But it's been, I think we really doubled down on that once it was clear that people operations was getting hit really hard by the rifts over the past year and a half.
Reduction in force. Yeah. Never a fun thing to deal with at all. It's always a challenge.
So, Alex, I've got kind of a loaded question, okay?
Loaded
you were looking at remote work before the pandemic struck, and obviously during the pandemic, a new model kind of entered the work world discussion, if you will. and that term was hybrid.
Mm-hmm.
What are your thoughts about hybrid roles, and how does the overall remote work play a role in hybrid?
Yeah, I think when it comes to remote, hybrid, in office, I've had, and obviously I've been like very motivated by remote work for a long time. I think I'm not terribly opinionated still, quite like I've been in this space for like 5 years, and I'm like, this is something I've said all the way through is like, I don't believe we've actually gotten to the phase where we're designing the future of work yet, because like just working with people, operations people for the past 3.5 years, they've been thinking 1 month ahead, right? Like there's still like not a ton of companies, and it's starting at the corporate level right now. You're starting to see a little bit more of it, of like thinking 10 years ahead of designing the company. But like, we basically, it's this phase of like crazy growth. That's all we can think about right now, to like crazy cost cutting and rifts. And that's all we can think about right now. And I don't think that a lot of leaders, especially in small to mid-sized businesses, have put enough design thought into what their future is going to look like. My thought is that you're going to have companies that shake out in a lot of different ways. I think there's like pluses and downsides of like every single model. I think those are well documented. I think there's a case for hybrid in a lot of situations, and I do think a lot of companies are going to end up with that, but it is coming at a talent expense, right? If you're like 2 days in the office in New York, you're missing out on some opportunities. So I mean, I think something that frustrated me, I'm obviously like really interested in this discussion, but like the LinkedIn discussions over this have just been so like not helpful, right? It's all people who have some like skin in the game, that they're like trying to, either they're selling office space and like really care about highlighting that like everybody needs to go back to the office and get real, or there's some company that is trying to like, their employer brand is like fully remote work, and so they're just going to war against in office, and like those discussions aren't constructive. I'm finding it more interesting to have one-on-one discussions with people who are actually trying to implement these policies and saying like what's working for them and not. And I'm still curious, and I still don't have a great sense of like how things will all shake up in the end, for sure.
That is kind of an interesting take, where you're kind of like, yeah, I just don't know where it's heading. But the thing that really stuck out to me, or something that you were saying, is like, you don't think a lot of small to medium businesses are thinking ahead. And, obviously I'm a little bit, jaded towards this, because, that's who we work with. But it's like, that's a huge message that I've been trying to articulate, is that you can't really follow the big headlines, because like companies, it's a copycat league, as they say in sports, right? Like smaller companies see what bigger companies do, and they kind of sometimes follow suit, and, it makes sense. But then at the same time, the risk of not thinking ahead is much bigger for these smaller companies. If you decided to implement a return to office policy, and you're a smaller company and 10 of your 50 employees quit, that's a much bigger problem than, Amazon or somebody else losing even like 1,000 employees or 500 employees. Yeah. So I really like what you're saying as far as trying to design something in the future, designing that employee experience for 10 years ahead. I absolutely love that.
And the other thing I'll add there is I think it's been hard to pivot, right? The people who are actually like thinking about this deeply are like the startups I've seen who have started since the pandemic, right? Because they have a choice to make up front, and they don't have all the baggage of like where employees are right now, and like how we're gonna, structure this in the future. And there's no way to structure it without screwing over some of our employee base. I mean, even like ChartHop, for example, the company I worked for was like, I think when we went into the pandemic, this was before my time, when we went into the pandemic, it was like 15 people out of a WeWork in New York. And very quickly the decision was made, like, we're going to be a fully remote team. There hasn't been any looking back, because that wasn't like that hard of a like, people. They started hiring a lot of people. They wanted to hire not in New York, and they made that decision and they moved it, right? That's very different from like a company that's got like 80% of the employees in one metro area, but like hired like 20% of the employees in the pandemic and like some other spaces. And now you've got to design to fit both of those employee bases and design this workspace. That's a much more tricky issue, right? So I think it's been interesting. And I think, a lot of newer companies have been fully remote since the pandemic. But I just think it's easier to design when you're starting from a blank canvas instead of like trying to repurpose where.
Yes, way easier. Also, those companies aren't really getting the headlines because you don't highlight some of the new, smaller companies. So I think that's another thing. People, I know it's tough out there right now. If you're looking for remote work, everyone's competing for the same small pool of jobs. But just hang in there, because I do believe, Alex, some of these startups and companies that are starting now, in 3 to 5 years, they're going to be bigger. And a majority of newer companies that are in the, especially in the startup space, are kind of leaning towards, do we really need this office? Yeah. So, Rick, the show's all you, sir.
Well, time to shift gears a little bit, Alex, and this is a two-parter. So, honest answers only, okay?
Yep.
Honest.
First and foremost, in your opinion, what is the greatest Billy Joel album, and why is it Songs in the Attic? Secondly, can you share with us a comical or inspiring moment you had while working remotely?
I mean, it's got to be The Stranger.
All right, I can accept that.
Okay.
The only reason I threw out Songs in the Attic was because of a song called Los Angelinos. And if there are any Billy Joel fans out there who are familiar with that song, it is the most hard-driving, piano-driven rock and roll song you will ever hear. Hands down, baby.
It is. That's a deep cut Billy Joel song there too.
Indeed, it is.
He is so happy. He is so happy that he can go back into the 1978 crates.
That's right. That's right. And so now that we've got that out of the way, can you share with us an interesting moment that you will never forget while working remotely?
It was so interesting. So, like, I started Gather was in its early stages, like when the pandemic hit. We ended up going through Y Combinator that summer. We didn't go to the Bay Area for Y Combinator. We did it completely remotely. We're in this like basement here in like a neighborhood of Cleveland, doing all like completely immersing ourselves for the first time in like West Coast startup world, but being like here in Cleveland and being like, we're complete frauds at this. And it was just like so interesting because Y Combinator traditionally was like such a like in-person bonding. You're really like, they bring people from around the world and they bring them all into the Bay Area and kind of like build this like YC culture, startup culture around them. And we're like doing that, but like we're in a freaking basement in Cleveland. And I think that was like just an absolutely like weird experience to be like, I don't know, shifting cultures, but not be physically doing that.
Was it musty in this basement? I'm trying to really get the picture.
It was musty, yeah. Well, okay, oh man, it was so much fun. Well, my two co-founders and I were like in our bubble together, and like one of them was my roommate here. So we like walk into our work office in this musty basement that we were paying $250 a month for. And it was a 20-person office that the three of us were going into. And it had an espresso machine in it, which is fantastic. Every day at like 4 o'clock, we would go and we'd get a big thing of ice cream and we'd make affogatos for ourselves. It was great. It was a blast.
Wow.
Like it was just
Living
like
large.
such a fun time.
Yeah.
And like when you think about like early stage of a company and you're going through a lot of roller coaster stuff, but like it was, just a weird time, but a fun time with the co-founders back then.
We couldn't have asked for a better response. Thank you for that. We appreciate you sharing.
Wait, did something happen? Hang on. Did something happen? Like, did a rat come and bite you while you were working or something?
Always digging for the juicier details.
Okay.
It was musty.
Are you ready for my like remote story?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, so during that time period, like many other dudes, grew my hair out because I was like, this is like, I need, like when we hit the pandemic, I needed a haircut at that time. And I never passed. Usually I hit the thing where you're like, my hair feels gross. I need to get a haircut now. Couldn't do that for like 8 weeks. Grew the hair longer than it ever had. Then I was like, okay, I'm past this point where it's like super annoying.
Like past the mullet, past the half mullet look, kind of?
Yeah. So I just kept going. I went for 16 months, maybe, grew it out. Like always before this had shorter hair than this. So I grew that out. So like that was my big like you know, everybody was commenting on the hair because I was working remotely with everybody. There are a lot of the people, like, I mean, we built this, like, People Ops community network. Everybody got to know me for this long hair and, like, had no idea. That was just like, yeah.
First time I saw you, you had those beautiful locks, man.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Then, I guess, to get to the story here, I've got some family in Tennessee. My grandfather had passed away during the pandemic. I'm going to, kind of, like, memorial luncheon with them, with a lot of extended family members, whatever. I'm there setting up for it. Got my long hair, whatever. I got comments from family members, but it was cool. But some random person in this community, I'm like turned around and somebody thinks that I'm my mom because we have like the same hair and it's like the same length. And that was the big moment where I was like, I think this is going to happen. Like, I don't think I can do this for forever.
Awkward.
Ended up cutting the hair. Had a bad first haircut on cutting the hair. It was not a good look. Ended up getting back to the length that I am now. But I go to these conferences and like people will not recognize me. I eventually had to change my LinkedIn profile because like people would just be like, oh, I thought like you had long hair. I walked right past you and had no idea. So I had that full long hair experience. But man, that awesome moment that I was confused for my mom was devastating. I mean, that
I think that's a first on our show too. No one has ever been mistaken for their mother on this show.
Oh my gosh! Imagine if someone came up behind you and like patted you on the butt and was like, "Hey, how you doing?" That would have been even worse. It would have been even worse. Oh my gosh! And you know, when I walked up to you in Vegas, and I looked you dead in your face, and like you looked at me like, "Hey, Kaleem," and I was like, "I don't know who you are." Because you cut your hair. I hadn't seen you, so it's absolutely true.
That was a particularly bad in that conference because I still had the LinkedIn profile with the long hair, and I like everybody was like that.
Pretty cool, yeah.
Alex, where can our listeners find you?
Yeah, very active on LinkedIn and the people operations space, so just give me a look. The lucky thing is, like, my last name has a weird spelling, so it's really easy to find me. So reach out there.
That is great, man.
You've been a super sport for tolerating us for this past hour. Thank you
it's been
very
fun.
much for joining us. And certainly thank you for your dedication to classic rock and roll. I can't thank you enough. You're keeping the dream alive, my friend. Thank you.
Yes. Thanks for coming, man. Really appreciate you, sir.
Thanks for having me.
Awesome.
All right, man. Come back anytime, okay? You've been listening to Remotely One. Visit us at remotely1.com/podcast for upcoming episodes. Subscribe to our YouTube channel and download our episodes on your favorite podcast app.
Hey, don't forget to clock out.